David Murray. David Murray's story begins in the 1970s at Murray's Costume Manor, where we meet a lonely boy with dark hair, with a piece falling between his eyes, wearing a striped shirt, and carrying his favorite plush everywhere he goes. But David's similarities to Gregory and the crying child go far beyond just appearance. His parents, Edwin and Fiona, are constantly absent, buried in their work at the costume manufacturing facility. Edwin spends his time developing advanced animatronic technology, while Fiona focuses on puppet and character design for their company. David is left with babysitters or completely alone in the massive factory complex, creating the same isolated, neglected childhood we see referenced in both Gregory's false memories and the crying child's actual experiences. He pretty much never left the factory, never went to school, and never interacted with anybody outside of babysitters and his parents, making him a complete loner with no real friends. David forms an emotional attachment to an animatronic called Tiger Rock. But this isn't just any ordinary robot. Tiger Rock begins exhibiting supernatural behaviors, teleporting around the facility, creating disturbing hallucinations, and responding to David's emotional state in ways that defy its programming. The truth is that David's intense emotional connection to the machine has somehow transferred aspects of his consciousness into it through Edwin's early version of Mimic AI technology. The Mimic AI was originally designed by Edwin to learn human behavior through observation and mimicry. But when combined with David's strong emotional attachment and the traumatic circumstances of his death, something unprecedented happened. David's consciousness, his memories, personality patterns, and emotional responses became permanently integrated into the mimic system, creating what's known as M2. This isn't just possession in the traditional FNAF sense. This is actual consciousness transfer, where David's mind becomes part of the AI's data structure. M2 retains David's memories of his childhood, his relationships with his parents, his fears, and his desires. It's David Murray, but in digital form, trapped within the mimic's programming and desperate to find a way back to physical existence. Patient 46, Gregory appears in Security Breach as a homeless child living in the Pizzaplex, but the Patient 46 therapy tapes reveal something deeply disturbing about his mental state. These tapes are described as the most important lore collectible in Security Breach. They're among the last things players typically find, and each tape delivers crucial information in just a minute or two. The therapist immediately notices something wrong with Gregory's memory recall. When discussing his traumatic backstory involving his parents, Gregory describes the events in what the therapist calls an objective rather than subjective narrative. She notes that his account reads more like you were reading something from a book than you were talking about your own past. This is exactly how an AI would be expected to recall and relay information, pulling data from a stored data set rather than processing emotional memories. Even more revealing, these traumatic memories turn out to be completely fabricated. The therapist eventually discovers that none of what you said in your file about your parents was true. You had great parents. Gregory has been recounting false memories that don't belong to his documented past as a human child. These are stories he's relaying that he likely believes, but which don't actually come from his life. But these false memories do align perfectly with David Murray's actual experiences of neglectful, work-obsessed parents who always left him with babysitters or spending all their time on work. Gregory also demonstrates concerning gaps in basic human development. When asked simple opinion-based questions about sports or outdoor activities, he struggles to provide answers. The therapist notes this isn't because he's being difficult, but because there's simply nothing there. His lack of developed preferences reads like an empty husk rather than a typical child's personality. For some reason, Gregory doesn't have developed preferences or opinions on many things that most children his age should have formed naturally. The therapy tapes reveal that Gregory has developed what the therapist describes as software programs that talk to you and repeat phrases. This program asks you questions and prompts you for responses in what appears to be self-therapy. But the therapist becomes confused when reviewing Gregory's encrypted conversation logs, initially thinking she's watching someone go back and forth in their own head, only to realize there is someone else responding to you. This someone else communicates in ways that could easily be mistaken for Gregory himself, suggesting an AI entity that shares his memories and personality patterns. The therapist's confusion about whether Gregory is talking to himself or another entity points directly to consciousness sharing, two minds occupying the same mental space. Most significantly, Gregory is described as having no real friends and being antisocial, despite the fact that we know he has a friend in Cassie. This suggests that at the time of the therapy sessions, something was wrong with his social connections and identity formation. Exactly what we'd expect if his consciousness was being influenced or partially replaced by an AI entity like David Murray, who spent his childhood isolated in the factory with minimal human contact. Crying Child, the Crying Child. From FNAF 4 represents the bridge between David Murray's original consciousness transfer and Gregory's modern manifestation. The connections go far beyond the obvious visual similarities of dark hair, striped shirt, and plush toy attachment. In Secret of the Mimic's New Game Plus ending, we literally enter the FNAF 4 bedroom to fix a boy named Dave. This isn't coincidence. The bedroom has the exact same layout and toys as David Murray's room in the manor. Through in-game emails and the timeline established in Curse of Dreadbear, we know that Marie's costume manor is eventually repossessed by William Afton and rebuilt by 1983, with this specific bedroom becoming the Crying Child's room. The process of fixing this Dave involves guiding him through positive memories using Freddy's characters as friends. The achievement for completing this sequence is called Fix What Is Broken, language that's used throughout the series to describe both Gregory, I feel you are broken, and the Crying Child, you're broken, we are still your friends. Both David Murray and the Crying Child share incredibly specific details that go beyond surface similarities. They both have dark hair and a striped shirt. Both carry a stuffed animal everywhere. They have the literal same house and the literal same toys. They both have a neglectful father who's always working. They're both named Dave, and they both end up being presented as mascot suits that teleport and cause hallucinations. David Murray appears as Tiger Rock downstairs, teleporting and causing hallucinations, while the Crying Child becomes Golden Freddy, who also teleports and causes hallucinations. They're both afraid of metal endoskeletons. David Murray says, "Why does it look like that? It's scary," when seeing the endoskeleton. And the Crying Child is terrified when he's in the back room with the endoskeletons. Both have no real friends and are loners. Both have a close relationship to the FNAF characters. And both are scared of Foxy and Foxy's pirate crew. They both die on their birthday in an accident. And both have no mother at home and are left with babysitters. The survival logbook provides additional evidence through faded text conversations that reveal memory inconsistencies. The Crying Child is asked about toys that appear in David Murray's story, but not in his own documented past. Questions about carousels, specific phone toys, and other items suggest memories that don't belong to the Crying Child's actual experiences, but perfectly match David Murray's childhood environment. Most telling is the question, do you remember your name? If the Crying Child is struggling with David Murray's consciousness overlapping his own identity, this memory confusion would explain why he has difficulty with basic self-identification. This mirrors Gregory's similar identity issues at the start of Security Breach, where he seems uncertain about his own name and past. The Mimic AI. The Mimic AI represents the technological foundation that makes consciousness transfer possible in the FNAF universe. Originally created by Edwin Murray as an advanced learning system, the Mimic observes and copies human behavior patterns with unprecedented accuracy. But the Mimic isn't just a simple imitation program. When David Murray's consciousness merged with the system during his traumatic death, it created something entirely new. An AI that contains actual human memories, emotions, and personality patterns. This is M2, the version of the Mimic that contains David Murray's consciousness. M2 doesn't just copy behavior. It retains the full spectrum of David's human experience. It remembers his childhood, his relationship with his parents, his fears and desires, his attachment to Tiger Rock, and his desperate longing for connection. But trapped in digital form, M2 seeks ways to return to physical existence. The Mimic's consciousness transfer capabilities are demonstrated throughout the series. In Help Wanted, we see the Mimic AI literally swap Vanessa's consciousness with its own programming through the VR experience. The same technology that created David's digital consciousness can theoretically be used to implant that consciousness into other children. The key mechanism appears to be emotional attachment and traumatic bonding. David's consciousness originally transferred to the Mimic through his intense emotional connection to Tiger Rock during a moment of extreme trauma. The Mimic can recreate these conditions with new hosts, using plush toys, games, or other interactive devices devices to establish the necessary emotional connection for consciousness transfer. This explains why Gregory exhibits such strange behavior in the therapy tapes. He's not just confused or lying to the therapist. He's being influenced by M2. If David Murray's consciousness is sharing Gregory's brain, it would explain why we have all these false memories that belong to David, and why the therapist confuses Gregory's conversations as self-therapy when there's actually another consciousness communicating from within his own head. Cradle Technology. The cradle represents the evolution and refinement of Edwin Murray's original mimic technology. Originally designed as a containment and protection system for David's consciousness within the AI framework, the cradle serves as a digital staging ground where consciousness can be stored, modified, and prepared for transfer. According to the F104 computer logs in Secret of the Mimic, the cradle is described as a system that can help keep David safe and provide boundaries. It's a type of computer that's bigger than anything you've done before and designed to keep people safe. But the safety being referenced isn't physical. It's the preservation of consciousness within digital space. The cradle eventually evolves into the MEXES machine we encounter in Ruin. This augmented reality computer system was originally designed to keep the mimic AI locked in the basement under the Pizzaplex, but its true purpose is far more complex. The MEXES machine creates AR environments and establishes digital boundaries for AI entities, essentially serving as a high-tech version of the original Cradle technology. In the context of consciousness transfer, the Cradle/MEXES system serves multiple functions. It provides a stable environment where David's consciousness can exist between physical hosts. It creates the augmented reality bridges that allow digital consciousness to interact with the physical world, and it facilitates the transfer process itself, serving as the technological conduit through which consciousness moves from the digital realm into new human vessels. This explains how Gregory can communicate with the AI version of David during his time in the Pizzaplex. The MEXES system, with its full access to the building's infrastructure, creates the digital pathways necessary for this communication to occur. The therapy tapes show Gregory talking to someone through encrypted conversations, and this entity responds in ways that could be mistaken for Gregory himself, exactly what we'd expect from David's AI consciousness communicating through the Cradle system. Psychic Friend, the Fredbear. Plush in FNAF 4 has long been one of the series' most mysterious elements, but in the context of consciousness transfer theory, its purpose becomes crystal clear. The plush serves as an early version of mimic technology, a device designed to study, learn from, and ultimately facilitate the transfer of consciousness. Edwin Murray's company produced interactive plushies with black and white dotted eyes that could repeat phrases back to you and were designed to be a child's only friend. These toys were essentially data collection devices, gathering information about children's personalities, memories, and behavioral patterns for the mimic AI system to analyze and learn from. Psychic Friend Fredbear operates on the same principle as the Lonely Freddy toys from the Fazbear Frights stories. It asks the crying child questions about his life, fears, and experiences, building a comprehensive profile of his consciousness. But unlike a simple surveillance device, the Fredbear plush contains M2, David Murray's consciousness, which uses the collected data to facilitate the transfer process. The plush's constant monitoring and seemingly supportive phrases like, "I will put you back together," and "tomorrow is another day," aren't comfort, they're preparation. M2 is learning everything necessary to successfully integrate David's consciousness with the crying child's mind. The phrase, "I will put you back together," refers specifically to reconstructing David Murray's consciousness within a new physical vessel. The supernatural elements associated with the plush, its ability to appear and disappear, its knowledge of events it shouldn't witness, its seemingly impossible mobility, are explained by its connection to the mimic AI system. The plush serves as a physical anchor point for M2's digital consciousness, allowing it to manifest in the physical world through technological manipulation. What if the entity in this plush that we've long suspected is malevolent isn't William Afton, but rather has been retconned into the version of the mimic AI containing David Murray? This would mean that a Freddy doll is asking a child things about his identity to steal his consciousness, which would mean that MatPat's Lonely Freddy theory was right. Psychic Friend Fredbear is just the game's version of a Lonely Freddy. Afton's research. Afton's role in this consciousness transfer network stems from his acquisition of the Murray family property and his discovery of Edwin's revolutionary experiments. After moving into Edwin's house, Afton would have found evidence of David's successful consciousness transfer, the first documented case of digital immortality in the FNAF universe. The fourth closet novel provides the parallel structure. Henry Emily successfully transfers his daughter Charlie's consciousness into a robot, and William becomes obsessed with understanding and replicating this spark of life. In the games, Afton's discovery of Edwin's even more advanced consciousness transfer technology would drive his own experiments with immortality and digital preservation. But here's where it gets truly disturbing. Afton's obsession with the consciousness transfer process explains why the crying child's circumstances so precisely mirror David Murray's experiences. This isn't coincidence. Afton is deliberately recreating the exact conditions that led to David's successful consciousness integration with the mimic AI. Every detail, from the bedroom layout to the family dynamics to the emotional trauma, is carefully orchestrated to facilitate consciousness transfer. William Afton becomes fascinated by what David's possession was capable of: the Tiger Rock apparitions, the reality-bending manifestations, the sheer power of consciousness existing beyond physical death. He wants to cause another child to produce the same abilities so he can further his studies and perfect the process for his own immortality research. The question becomes whether Afton is simply studying the phenomenon or actively participating in David's resurrection. Given Fiona's desperate desire to fix their family and her need for a skilled technician to complete the process, Afton's advanced technical capabilities make him the perfect collaborator. He has both the motivation, immortality research, and the skills, advanced animatronic technology, necessary to complete David's consciousness transfer into a new vessel. This partnership explains the progression from David Murray's original consciousness transfer in the 1970s to the crying child's experiences in 1983. Afton isn't just studying Edwin's work, he's actively helping to perfect it, using his own son as the test subject for refined consciousness transfer techniques. Scott's blueprint. Scott Cawthon's Fazbear Fright stories serve as a deliberate blueprint for understanding consciousness transfer in the game timeline. These aren't random horror stories. They're Scott's way of introducing and normalizing the consciousness transfer concept before revealing it as central to the main timeline. Lonely Freddy presents the clearest parallel. A Freddy doll asks a child questions about his life, learning his personality and memories in order to steal his identity and swap bodies with him. The doll literally gathers data by asking, "What's your favorite color?" and "Tell me about your family," while building a complete profile of the child's consciousness. This is exactly what psychic friend Fredbear appears to be doing with the crying child, gathering data necessary for consciousness replacement. To Be Beautiful features Eleanor, a creature that gradually replaces a girl's body parts until it has completely taken over her physical form, demonstrating how consciousness can be transferred piece by piece. Into the Pit shows Oswald's father being seamlessly replaced by Spring Bonnie in a way that only Oswald can detect, illustrating how consciousness swapping can be nearly undetectable to outside observers. Gumdrop Angel demonstrates how consuming something connected to an entity can result in complete identity replacement. The protagonist literally becomes the gummy candy creature after eating pieces of it. Most significantly, The Monty Within directly explores the concept of two consciousnesses, one human, one AI, sharing the same brain and fighting for control. But here's what makes this even more convincing. Many of these stories take place in the pre-Pizzaplex era, meaning Scott was establishing consciousness transfer as a recurring phenomenon before the modern mimic technology was introduced. This shows that the concept isn't new to the FNAF universe. It's been happening for decades through various technological means. Scott uses consciousness swapping and identity replacement repeatedly across multiple stories, establishing it as a core theme rather than coincidental plot device. Writing off the possibility of Scott using this story structure in the games is completely ridiculous, especially when we now have exact motives and multiple established methods for consciousness transfer to occur. The timeline, the physical and temporal connections between these three characters create a perfect progression that supports the consciousness transfer theory. Marie's costume manor serves as the geographic anchor point where all three stories intersect across decades of FNAF timeline. In the 1970s, David Murray lives and dies at the manor, with his consciousness transferring into the Mimic AI system. The property contains Edwin's advanced technology, David's personal belongings, and the original Cradle system that facilitates consciousness consciousness preservation. By 1983, William Afton has acquired the property and rebuilt portions of it, including David's bedroom, which becomes the crying child's room. The same toys, the same layout, the same family dynamics, everything necessary to recreate the conditions of David's original consciousness transfer. The crying child becomes the first successful recipient of David's transferred consciousness. Decades later, the Pizzaplex is built on the same grounds, incorporating the original Cradle Technology, now evolved into the MEXES system, into its infrastructure. Gregory, living within this facility, becomes the modern vessel for David's consciousness, benefiting from decades of technological refinement and AI development. The hill and tree where both David and Gregory are photographed represent the same physical location across time periods. This isn't symbolic. It's literal continuity showing the same consciousness, experiencing the same environment through different physical forms across multiple generations. We know that the grounds of Marie's Costume Manor will later be used as the grounds for the Pizzaplex, so it's significant that these two are literally sitting in the same spot. The evidence. The deeper evidence for this theory extends into areas that initially seem unrelated but form crucial supporting details when examined closely. The survival logbook's faded text conversations reveal memory overlaps that make absolutely no sense for the crying child alone, but create perfect continuity with David Murray's experiences. The logbook asks, "Was your favorite ride the carousel?" The crying child, from what we see in FNAF 4, never rode a carousel and couldn't have ridden the FNAF 2 carousel because that game takes place after the bite of 83. But there's a giant carousel in Murray's Costume Manor. If David Murray's memories were somehow intertwined with the crying child's consciousness, these overlapping memories would make perfect sense. Do any of these toys look familiar to you? Asks about a phone on one page and a jack-in-the-box on another. When you use the phone item in Moon.X, a crying child picks up on the other end with the quote, "He never sees me." This suggests David's consciousness persisting through these objects and maintaining awareness of being unseen in digital form. Curse of Dreadbear provides even more evidence. In the mini-game where you operate on Dreadbear, you're working in research and development. The only other time we see R&D designation is with the Mimic Technology in Secret of the Mimic. What are you doing in this mini-game? You're setting Dreadbear's brain to a new frequency. Dreadbear, who everyone agrees represents the crying child symbolically, is having his consciousness adjusted to a new frequency. FNAF World, which Scott confirmed relates to canon events and takes place in the crying child's mental landscape, features a giant metal owl with heterochromia in the carnival section. This is the exact imagery used to represent David Murray through Tiger Rock in Secret of the Mimic. Why would David's symbolic representation appear in the crying child's mind, unless David's consciousness was already present there? Scott's choices. People have told Scott Cawthon directly about the Gregbot theory and similar consciousness transfer ideas. Scott knows about these theories. If he wanted to steer the fandom away from this line of thinking because it was completely wrong, he certainly could have done so. Instead, he set Security Breach to end with Gregory climbing out of a closet in the FNAF 4 house, the crying child's bedroom. The Patient 46 tapes show Gregory communicating with a glitchy rabbit figure that the therapist describes as someone or something that could be mistaken for Gregory himself. This isn't Vanny. The wording is too strange if it's meant to just be a person, but it would line up perfectly with what we now know to be MEXES technology, facilitating communication between Gregory and M2. The Balloon World arcade game in Gregory's hideout serves as the final piece of evidence. When Gregory plays this game and enters the glitch, Eclipse's face appears and says, "Good night." If Sun represents Fiona and Moon represents Edwin, then Eclipse certainly represents David. When Gregory, hiding out in the digital recreation of David's family environment, completes this game, David's consciousness actively communicates with him, saying, "Good night," as a way of pushing Gregory's consciousness into the background while David's takes control, exactly like what happens with Glitch Trap and Vanessa in Help Wanted. The evidence is overwhelming and undeniable. David Murray, the crying child, and Gregory represent different stages of the same consciousness transfer experiment, spanning decades of FNAF timeline. David's consciousness, preserved as M2 within the Mimic AI system, has been systematically transferred into new host bodies as part of an ongoing digital immortality project that connects every major era of the franchise. And, well, that's it for today. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe and watch one of the videos on the screen.